Welcome to another episode of the Indiana Hoosiers Roundtable podcast. I am Brandon Brown, joined today by the one and only Todd Golden. While Jack's lost up there in the Pacific Northwest somewhere. He's wandering through the wilderness. Maybe no, he's actually on a flight right now. I think you said
Yep.
Right, Todd. But that's
right.
That's pretty awesome that Jack got to go out there and cover a couple West Coast games. First Washington, and then Oregon last night. He sent me a pretty cool video. He's like, I just pulled off to the side of the freeway, and this is what I saw. And it was like the ocean, like crashing against a mountain and like all these trees. And I'm like, man, that's pretty cool. He said he had never been up there in that part of the country before. So good for Jack, at least for the Washington game. Maybe not so much for last night. You and I were talking a little bit about this 9-point loss that Indiana suffered at Oregon, but it really probably shouldn't have went that way based on what you do. I kind of forgot the game was on. Those 9:00 tip-offs for the West Coast is a little tricky. I was, like I told you, I was sitting here watching the NBA, and I'm like, oh man, that Indiana game. Anyways, the Ducks finish on a 10-0 run to win the game by 9. I mean, that's a tough way to close it out right there when you have the lead late into the second half.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way that Oregon started that run was kind of a miracle in itself. Indiana had just taken a 1-point lead. Trey Galloway had hit a 3-point shot to put Indiana up. And what had been a very close game through most of its running. Both teams had good stretches. Both teams had pretty poor stretches. But Indiana is up 1 with under 2 minutes to go. You feel pretty good about that being on the road. And then they defended Oregon's possession pretty well up until I don't want to criticize Indiana's defense too much, but they dished the ball to Oregon guard Jackson Shellstad. That's hard to say that 3 times fast, but dished it to him on the left wing, and he was about 35 feet from the basket, and Anthony Leal was slightly late to close out on him, but Shellstad fired away and he hit a logo 3, Caitlin Clark style against him. And Indiana just never recovered from that. They had a couple bad possessions of their own after that that obviously didn't equal any points because Oregon finished on a 10-0 run. So a tough way to finish the game from a performance that wasn't really that bad, but obviously had a bad outcome. So Indiana has to regroup, and they have a big game against Ohio State on Saturday afternoon.
Well, you mentioned Trey Galloway. He finished with 16 points, 4 assists. He did have 3 turnovers. That's not a horrible number, but he's doing a great job of leading the team. I know Coach Woodson talked about what he's doing on defense. I know after the Washington win, Luke Goody kind of talked about him and Anthony Leal kind of setting the tone when it comes to defensively, just being – they're starters and they play a lot of minutes, but they're glue guys. And that's right. Kind of, you need dudes like that on your team. And so, yeah, just what can you say about Trey Galloway? You mentioned he hit the 3 first to give them the lead. And then,
right.
Whatever happened down the stretch, it just kind of happened. And, they close out on that 10-0 run and lose the game. But what's Trey Galloway been doing lately here? For
the most part, he's been doing a good job just facilitating the offense. He's picking his own spots pretty well. He's always taken this shot, but he's really fallen in love with this drive the lane floater that he takes from about anywhere from 5 to 12 feet away from the basket. He's pretty accurate with that shot. He was probably a little bit guilty of trying to force the issue last night. He only had 3 turnovers, but he had a couple other ones that probably could have been turnovers that were tipped out of bounds by Oregon, and so they don't count as turnovers. But but for the most part, he's been able to sort of rein that in and keep put everybody in their best spots to be able to run the Indiana offense correctly. And he's been a good leader in the sense of off court leadership and just setting the right example and things like that. He's been around for a long time. I think last night he set the Indiana career record for games played. So he obviously knows the ropes, and the time is running out. It's, in my experience covering college basketball, no matter what kind of season you have, a lot of times seniors kind of have this sort of moment of clarity where they realize that the time is running out and it's time to really focus on finishing the right way. So I think he's done that. I think to a degree, Omar Ballo has been the same way. Luke Goody too. I mean, Luke Goody might be able to come back next year. It's probably doubtful, but if he gets that injury waiver, but Galloway's been, he's and Anthony Leal. I shouldn't leave him out. He's been the same way. All those guys have done a good job putting Indiana steady ship, which they weren't always on, through the course of the season. So Trey deserves a lot of credit for that, and he's been productive. I mean, 16 points out of Trey Galloway is more than you can ask for. That's well above his season average.
I wanted to talk real quick about the record for the most games played ever at a place like IU. Obviously, a blue blood, tons of big names have come through there. But it's funny, like, you kind of think records like this might not ever get broken the way college basketball is now with the transfer portal, and it just kind of seems like you're not going to see a lot of fourth and fifth year guys, even fourth year guys at programs, let alone a fifth year guy. But how big of a deal is it for Trey Galloway to break a record like that at a place like Indiana?
Oh, I'm sure it's a big deal, and part of it, the record is because of the extra COVID year. So you're going to have a lot of guys who stuck around for the whole time in the COVID era setting records like this, and they may not be broken because of the reasons you stated. Plus, a lot of these guys got an extra year anyway. So, but you still have to be able to perform to set a record like that. I mean, there's, and I'm not trying to criticize Anthony Leal, but he's been around for the same amount of time as Trey Galloway has, but Trey has been able to perform at a level to where he's been able to play in the games. Whether it was as a reserve early in his career or lately, or more in his more recent seasons mostly as a starter. So it's sometimes people say stuff like you hear this with baseball a lot, compilers, like so-and-so played for X amount of years and, wasn't a Hall of Famer, but they were a compiler. Well, you got to be able to be pretty good to be in there to be a compiler, and I'm not suggesting that Trey is a compiler, but, he's been good enough to be in the lineup. What I'd be interested in, and I haven't looked this up, so I'm actually asking the question, not to you, but just rhetorically, how many minutes, who has the minutes record in history? And that would be interesting to look at. I don't know that Trey would, but I'm sure he'd be up there just based on the amount of games he's played. So but Trey has been a contributor from the beginning, and that's what helps set a record like that. And I'm sure he's probably not thinking about it right now, but when the time comes to reflect on his career, I'm sure he'll be very proud of that.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. You do hear that in all sports. Like, well, I mean, like even like someone like LeBron, who's clearly in the discussion for like the greatest to ever touch a basketball. He's only breaking these records because he's played for 22. Well, then everybody play for 22 years. Just go ahead and do that. There's something to be said about being available, staying healthy, being able to contribute. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, you don't get to those numbers unless you're bringing something quite valuable to the table. First and foremost, being available, being healthy, and being able to play. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty cool thing. And yeah, I know Luke Goody was mentioning it earlier in the week after they beat Washington, just how big of a deal it was. So that's a pretty cool thing there for Trey Galloway. I purposely didn't ask you about this because I just wanted you to run with it. You have in the notes for our podcast, Trey Galloway, pre-haircut and post-haircut. What's this?
And post-haircut.
What's this about?
So for those, obviously, IU fans know very well that for most of his career, Trey Galloway.
The flow, right? He had the flow. Yeah.
I mean, it was pretty glorious, to be honest. I mean, he had some really good, he had good hair. And this is speaking as somebody who is jealous because I don't. So he got his haircut before the away game at Purdue, right at the end of January. And I actually had this ready to go last night. I didn't do it because when I had it ready to go is right towards the end of the game when Oregon made the run. So I never did post this, but just so fans know, Trey Galloway pre-haircut, 7.1 points per game, 4 points assists, 41% from the field. After the haircut, 11 points per game, 5.2 assists, 46% from the field. So he's kind of like the anti-Samson. Like Samson got his haircut and he lost his strength. Trey Galloway got his haircut and he's become a more productive player, at least in those categories. So
the hair was holding him back.
Maybe. I mean, we haven't really had the opportunity to, we haven't had the forum to ask Trey about, when we talk to the players post game, it's very brief and usually it doesn't lend itself to those kind of silly kind of questions. But maybe at the Big Ten tournament next week, we can ask him about that because we get a little bit more time with the players in that format. So, the haircuts. I don't know what the fans think of his haircut. I know some people I talked to about it were kind of sad that he let his flow go, but he's been rolling since he went with the shorter style.
That's pretty funny. Well, so I don't know if you would call that inconsistency in a hairdo because he kept the long hair for quite a long time, if I remember correctly, and only has had this new cut for a little while, like you said. But all jokes aside, inconsistency has been a theme that we've talked about on every episode here. I would guess that it reared its head a little bit last night when you when you lose the game, giving up a 10-0 run. Obviously, something changed. They had, like you said, they had a lead, going into the final 2 minutes, and then the wheels kind of fell off a little bit. So, just as we get ready to put a bow on the regular season here, as you said, one game left against Ohio State? Yeah, last game against Ohio State. This inconsistency it's just here to stay. I mean, the season's over at this point in terms of playing all the games. So this is just who they are. I mean, is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you look at last night's game. I'm looking at the box score right now. Umar Ballo had a double-double, 10 points, 12 rebounds. That's, fine. Malik Renew, coming off of one of his best games of the season at Washington, only had 8 points last night, 4 for 12 from the field. Mackenzie Mbako had 8 points, all of them in the second half, but was 2 of 10 from the field. Luke Goody only had 6 points last night. So, and all teams go through that, but unfortunately, it's hard to depend on any one player with Indiana for any more than a game or two stretch. And, I know Indiana isn't the only team that has that happen to them, but the problem is Indiana doesn't have as much margin for error. So you really need all of the players, maybe not all of the players, that's asking a lot, but most of your contributors to be contributing in the way you expect when your margin for error to make the tournament is really thin. So that's what holds Indiana back a little bit. The defensive effort last night was, just in general, was also kind of off and on. Oregon shot 39% from the field, which is not a bad defensive effort, honestly. But there were times when they, the 10-0 run to end the game, for example, where IU let their guard down a little bit. So consistency is an issue in a big way. The teams they're fighting with around them in the Big Ten have had the same problem. Ohio State, who comes here to Bloomington on Saturday, which is a huge game. I mean, that game is now for basically to get out of day one of the Big Ten tournament and for jockeying for position on the NCAA tournament bubble. So it's a huge game. And both of those teams have been super inconsistent all year. So they're where they're at. They earned where they're at. They're floating around at 9th and or 10th in the Big Ten. So, it's been an issue. You don't want to be too unforgiving. I mean, this was a road game at Oregon, and that's not an easy to win at. But nonetheless, you would hope that the performances would even out a little bit. But that's just not the way it's been this season.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back to the Big Ten tournament here in a moment. But I wanted to ask this because I in watching a couple of Mike Woodson's recent post-game press conferences, he's been asked about this, and I think it's a very interesting question because it seems kind of counterintuitive, but at the same time, it kind of makes sense. And the question is, did his resignation or everybody kind of knowing what was going to happen, did it take some pressure off of this team? I mean, they won, was it 3 in a row just now until losing to Oregon, and they were in the Oregon game. They've been in a lot of these games that have been pretty close, and Mike Woodson himself has said that. He said, we were within a couple plays of winning several of these games that we lost, but close doesn't count. So it's just been kind of back to the inconsistency discussion as well. But what do you think that knowledge of Mike Woodson being done did to the way he coached, the way his players played for him, just kind of the whole final stretch here I don't know, when did he actually announce that? Has it been over a month at this point?
It's been about a month.
Yeah. Okay. So about a month ago,
Wisconsin game, which was, I believe, on February 4th, if memory serves. I'm kind of on the fence about it. I mean, I don't doubt that it's helped the players focus a little bit more. I don't know that it's helped them relax anymore because the pressure's been on to jockey for Big Ten position as well as to get back on the NCAA tournament bubble. And I think there's been I think it's a little bit overrated. I mean, IU played some close games before he resigned too. I mean, the game with Purdue. I'm trying to remember where the Maryland game fit into all of this. I don't know if that was after or before. I want to say it was before his resignation. Anyway, I mean, I think it's offered more clarity to the players. I mean, there's no question about that. And the games that they've won, aside from the home game against Purdue, which was a very impressive performance, easily their best of the season, that needs to be given its proper due. This win streak, though, was built on a 5-point home win against Penn State and a road win against a really poor Washington team. And I'm not trying to denigrate what IU did because IU wasn't necessarily even winning those types of games in the middle of January, but the schedule eased up a little bit too. And, but they were competitive at Oregon last night. As you mentioned, they've been competitive in other games, got the big win at Michigan State in the middle of the month. So I think they've been playing better. I don't think there's any question about that. What I will say, maybe I'll approach this from the other direction. I don't know if it's helped the players as much as it's helped Mike Woodson. Mike Woodson has coached this team with more flexibility than he did prior to resigning. Now, maybe that's also a coincidence, but for example, they use the zone defense at Michigan State to throw them off balance to win. He's been riding, reliable players established through the game more, like for example, when they beat, I want to say it was Michigan State a little bit, but he's been riding lineups that were hot through the course of the game more in the second half than he used to, and benching guys who weren't effective more so than he used to. So I feel like maybe it's less. I'm sure the players have had at least some sense, like I said, some sense of clarity. But I also think Mike Woodson's done a little bit better job in terms of his own coaching and throwing himself into more ideas in terms of ways that they can win. I mean, Indiana's been pretty flexible in the way that they've won some of these games. They're not doing it the same way every single time. Mike Woodson, a lot of people make a big deal out of this, has gotten away from playing Malik Renew and Umar Ballo at the same time as much as they used to. So things like that. I think he's been freed up by, the lack of pressure about his job. I think he's been more. It's a shame because if he had shown this side of himself earlier on, maybe he wouldn't have been under as much pressure as he was. So I think he's changed a little bit, and I think the players have responded to that.
Yeah, it's just an interesting dynamic. I mean, I can't even really think of a time I've been in that kind of situation where you're done, but I mean, you still want to do the best you can. I mean, you've got all these players who are looking to you for leadership and guidance. It's weird.
It's not the first time Indiana's gone through this too. Fans with long memories will remember that Mike Davis he resigned in the middle of February and had a runway similar to this to the end of his regime at IU in 2006. And IU played better after he resigned. I was going to write a column about that later this week. So history is repeating itself in that sense, little different circumstance in terms of the resignations. But that's probably the only, it's other than a coach announcing their retirement, which is obviously a little different deal. It is rare to have somebody who's kind of a lame duck coach for over a month. So
yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting, and we'll continue to see it. They have the Big Ten tournament coming up, and depending on how that goes, maybe the NCAA tournament. That's what we'll kind of close basketball out here with as we finish, as we put a bow on this episode of the podcast. So let's start there. You mentioned Ohio State, the Ohio State game on the 8th. What is that, a Saturday? and that is a home game. So that's a potentially big one for Indiana, as both of those teams are sitting at 9-10 in the Big Ten, and yeah, like you said, battling it out for, I guess, what spot would that be, 9th or 10th in the conference?
Right, but that's a big difference because
yes,
the 9th spot gets avoids day one of the Big Ten tournament. The 10th spot doesn't.
So there you go. So when you look at how important this game is, I mean, to battle for the 9th or 10th spot in the Big Ten doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but it is with the new format. 15 out of 18 teams will play. That's kind of strange, but when you look at the bracket, you kind of get it, I guess. This is obviously all new and the first time we're seeing this, but just kind of talk about the whole tournament in a nutshell, but then also, where Indiana falls and how this game will impact what they do coming up here next week.
Yeah, I think fans don't really think about the conference tournament until it comes. And now that it's almost here, it's a lot different from your father's Big Ten tournament. So in the past, avoiding day one of the tournament was easy. You just, if you were on day one of the Big Ten tournament with the 14-team format, you had a pretty bad year. I mean, you're talking you would have had to finish 11th or lower to play on day one. It was just 2 games, 4 pretty lousy teams, to be honest. Now with the new format, it's more the middle of the pack teams that are playing on day one. You got seeds 10 through 15 playing on the first day. So you have some teams with NCAA tournament aspirations playing on that first day. So, but you also don't want to put yourself in a position where you're playing 5 games in 5 days to, win the tournament. Now, a team like Indiana or Ohio State isn't going to have to win 5 games in 5 days to make the NCAA tournament. I think IU needs to certainly beat Ohio State on Saturday and then probably win 1 game at the Big Ten tournament and probably be in the NCAA tournament. Right now, I haven't seen the bracketology today after the Oregon loss, but before yesterday's game, IU was in the field. They weren't a play-in team either. They were legitimately in the field. So last night's loss may drop them back into a play-in situation. We'll see, but Indiana controls their fate, which they didn't 2 weeks ago. They had to take control of their fate. So that's a good thing. But Saturday's game against Ohio State is a real showdown in terms of, like I said, Big Ten tournament positioning, but also Ohio State's right there with Indiana in about the same spot in terms of the NCAA tournament. So it's Ohio State has to win. I mean, the pressure's more on them than it is on Indiana in the sense of the fact that IU beat Ohio State over in Columbus back in January. So Ohio State can't afford to go 0-2 against one of the teams they're competing with. So a huge game. They're going to come ready to play, you would think. IU needs to protect their home court. And if they do, they should put themselves in a pretty good position, obviously for the Big Ten tournament, but also for the NCAA tournament afterwards.
Yeah, sorry. As you were talking, I was trying to absorb the new tournament bracket and just how it looks. And you've got like you said, 10 through 15 playing out there, and then 9 and 8 already know who's playing, but then 6, 7, or 5, 6, 7, or 6, 7, and 8. No, 5, 6, 7 don't know. It's just weird. Yeah. Like you're not going to know who you're playing.
The simplest way to think of it is they just added 1 game is what they did. I mean, to the old format. So, and I know some people, Penn State coach Mike Rhodes had a colorful explanation for his own team probably not making the Big Ten tournament last week when they lost at IU. Word I probably can't say on the podcast. I don't know. I thought that's what I think a lot of people are like. I think the initial reaction from a lot of people is like, oh, this is terrible that they're not taking all the teams to the Big Ten tournament. But then I watch the teams that are not going to be in the Big Ten tournament.
Yeah.
On both the men's and the women's side. I don't want to see those teams.
Yeah.
To be honest. I'm fine with those teams. I'm never seeing those teams play basketball for the rest of the season. I hate to rip on them, but with all due respect, I don't need to see Washington basketball fill out the numbers in Indianapolis. And I will say this, it has a kind of soccer kind of feel to it too, where you're trying to avoid the bottom 3 in soccer. In European soccer, if you finish in those spots, you get relegated. This is sort of a college basketball version of that. In that sense, I think it's kind of added some intrigue to the bottom of the standings that wouldn't otherwise be there. So, listen, I don't have a problem with, like I said, I don't need to see Washington men play again. I don't need to see the Purdue women play again. You get on the women's side, you get 18 games. On the men's side, you get 20 games. If you didn't get out of the bottom three with that many games, then you kind of dug your own grave. So,
Yeah.
I mean, so I'm okay with, I don't know, 15 is just a weird number. I would have made it 16, but I'm not in charge. So it's fine. And the mission for Indiana on Saturday is to avoid to avoid having a double-digit seed. You don't want to have that because then you got to go the very long road to make any hay in the Big Ten tournament.
It is really. I mean, 16 is like the perfect number for a bracket. It's like you go down to 8, 4. It's just like that's the bet. Like they talk about with the college football eventually probably getting to 16.
Yeah, I mean, 16, you could have a strict tournament. I don't think you'd want to do that to protect your higher seeds, but you could figure out a way to have buys even with a 16-team tournament. Whatever. I mean, it is what it is. 15 teams. One more than there had been in the past. So it'll be fun. I'm glad it's in Indianapolis this year. Indy does a great job of hosting. Obviously, it's convenient for us, but that it's always Target Center up in Minneapolis did a good job last year, but it's more centrally located. More fans can come, and should be fun. That both starting today actually for the women's tournament, and then next week for the men.
Very cool. We'll get to the women's tournament in just a second. I want to put it to you like this: what you said. Maybe you haven't seen the most recent version of bracketology, but the last one you looked at had Indiana in, not a first four out, not a first four in, last four in type of thing, but in the tournament, but with some work to do still. So I'll ask it to you like this: is there something between now and when Selection Sunday gets here that will guarantee that they get in? And on the flip side, is there something that could play out that will guarantee that they will be out, given what they have left?
If you lose out, you're just putting yourself in serious jeopardy. I mean, the thing that people need to remember about bracketology is that if you're in the last four in, you're really not in at all. You're still out, because if there's any bid stealers in the other, you're the one that's going to get sliced. So Indiana needs to win at the very least one more game. I mean, they have to. They certainly need to beat Ohio State on Saturday to set the table. And even then, I think they need to win a game at the Big Ten tournament to make things safe, because I'm thinking right now they would probably play Oregon again in the Big Ten tournament. And I'm not sure whether it would be on a neutral floor. I'm not sure where Oregon's net is off the top of my head. It would be helpful if that was a quad 1 win. It certainly would be a quad 2 if it isn't. So that's what's put IU ahead of some teams on the bubble. IU does have the quantity of quad 1 wins compared to the bubble. I mean, the bubble this year is awful. I mean, it really is. I mean, I've done a story. I did it earlier this week, where I've listed IU's competition on the bubble. And it's just, a lot of these lower level SEC teams and middle of the pack ACC teams and Big 12 teams, some of those teams have like 3-11 quad 1 records. I mean, the mid-major teams have to be pulling their hair out that they can't get a bid above, the Wake Forest of the world, who really haven't proven much. And fans of other schools would probably make the same argument about Indiana, but so that's helped. And Indiana has, the win over Purdue was huge. I mean, that was a quad 1 win. Penn State has managed to get themselves back in the top 75, which means their win at Penn State has gone back to being a quad 1 win. It had dropped out for a little bit. So IU really needs Penn State to kind of finish strong to maintain their spot there. But I think if IU wins, certainly if they win 2 more games, I think they're in for sure. If they win 1 and then they go 0-1 at the Big Ten tournament, it's going to be a little nervous. If they go 0 for the rest of the season, I think it's going to be really nervous. Then you're taking your fate out of your own hands, and it's going to be dependent on some team, on the rest of the bubble teams faltering as well. And you never know. I mean, like last night, most of the bubble teams, including IU, lost. Other than Ohio State. Ohio State won that crazy double overtime game against Nebraska at home. But every day is a little bit different. It's scoreboard watching. It's teams that have been fans of teams on the bubble know the drill. So IU, though, I think controls their own fate. If they can win, I think they're in.
Well, there you have it. Win and you're in. I mean, you hear that all the time. Yeah, you win games. It makes it harder to to keep them out, especially when they're hovering right around the edge, right there, right on the bubble. And it's not a very strong bubble this year. So let's shift gears a little bit. Let's take a look at the women's basketball side of things for Indiana. The women's basketball Big Ten tournament starts today. Starts tomorrow for Indiana. Just thoughts on that, Todd. You're covering this thing a little more in depth than most. So what do Indiana women's basketball fans have to look at for this tournament coming up here?
Well, Indiana has a little bit different. Indiana women have a little bit different situation than they're typically used to as well. They in the 2020s, IU has been pretty much a lead pipe NCAA tournament team, and the last 3 seasons they've been an NCAA tournament host team. That's not going to happen this year. Indiana is the 9 seed in the Big Ten women's tournament. They play Oregon at noon tomorrow at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. Women have some work to do too. I mean, they're on the right side of the bubble, but they can ill afford a poor finish to the season too. I don't think they're necessarily in danger of missing the NCAA tournament, but if they lose to Oregon tomorrow, I think they are in danger of dropping into a play-in situation for the tournament. So the thing is, I wrote about this. It hasn't published yet. It will publish after we're done doing the podcast. There's a ton of Big Ten teams around IU on the bubble. And so if any one of those teams makes a decent run at the Big Ten tournament at the expense of Indiana, they're going to be vulnerable. They got a lot of teams on the bubble who could pass them. Another team that beat IU this year, Harvard, is also on the bubble. So IU, in theory, shouldn't be able to drop that much, but there's a lot of teams around them. Normally you don't get that dynamic on the bubble where you got so many teams from the same conference occupying those spots, but you do this year. So it really behooves Indiana to beat Oregon. After that, it's going to be tough because being in the 8-9 game means you're advancing to play the number 1 seed, and that is USC and Juju Watkins and company. So it's going to be a tall order for IU to get past their what would be a quarterfinal game on Friday against USC. I mean, if they could do that, then that's a win that almost nobody has, and they're in the tournament for certain. So it's going to be tough. The women have also been inconsistent this year. Their offense comes and goes. You've got 3 seniors. You got Sydney Parrish, Chloe Moore McNeil, and Caroline Striplin finishing out. Chloe Moore McNeil has been playing for IU for, I think, since 2020. So, and she's kind of had a cool rise through her career, was a bench player early and advanced to become a very important player in the last 2 or 3 years. Sydney Parrish, of course, transferred from Oregon, has been with the program for 3 years. Very popular player. And she's an Indiana native, would like to go out on a high note at her in her home base. Basically, she's from suburban Indy, so playing at Gainbridge Fieldhouse would be fun for her. And Caroline Striplin, 1-year player, transferred from Tennessee, but she's been really good this year. She's kind of came into her own once Big Ten play began, and has been a nice presence in the coast for the Hoosiers. Oregon's a big team, and that's not always a good matchup for Indiana, but Oregon doesn't really have a go-to scorer necessarily, so should be a good game at the Fieldhouse tomorrow. Indiana does certainly have a home court advantage, obviously, over Oregon playing in Indy, but should be a good tournament. There'll be a lot of eyes on it, as there was last year. Last year you had Caitlin Clark up in Minneapolis. This year you got Juju Watkins with USC and UCLA with Lauren Betts and company, 2 elite-level teams that are kind of co-prohibitive favorites in the tournament. So, but from Indiana's perspective, they got some work to do, and they just need to. I think they need to. They're kind of like the men. They need to win 1 game to kind of solidify their position. And unlike the men, though, they don't have. They have this game left, and then they'll long wait until they announce the women's field. So they need to beat the Ducks tomorrow and see where they can take it from there.
There you have it. Todd will be locked in on the women's basketball tournament, covering that in detail over the next couple days, 3-4 days. And what do we have here, Todd? It's March 5th, and we're talking football.
It's a new age at Indiana.
Wow.
I mean,
IU football.
In the past, IU fans didn't have to worry about football until April at the earliest. For the diehards, and most casual fans did not care about football until they booted the ball in late August or early September for their first game. But we're in a new era. Kurt Cignetti's got IU as a playoff team, 10-2 season last year. And kind of the last chapter of that season was yesterday. IU had their NFL Pro Day at both the stadium and at Mellencamp Pavilion, the practice facility. So kind of it didn't really occur to me until I was there. It was kind of a last hurrah for those particular group of guys who are leaving whose eligibility has run out, to kind of get back together, get the band back together, and try to further their careers at the NFL level. And it was interesting to watch. It was the first pro day I've ever attended, and so it was kind of fascinating to see how the format works. And
oh, wow, they let you go. What a concept. Never saw 1 second of anything while covering Michigan for 10 years, but
yeah,
I digress. Continue.
Yeah, no, I feel your pain, but what you missed out on was a lot of weightlifting, bench pressing, which I actually thought was I ran into a coach I used to cover who also is a name that's well known to Indiana fans, Kurt Mallory, who's the son of former coach Bill Mallory. And Kurt was also an assistant at IU earlier in his career. He's coaching Indiana State these days, who I used to cover. And Indiana State doesn't really have enough players to justify their own pro day, so they usually bring. They had one of their players, Garrett Olendike, kind of joined in on IU's pro day. I was talking to him, and I'd never been to. I wasn't really sure what constituted success in the bench press, for example. So I'm asking these stupid questions like what's good for a certain position? What do you want to see as a coach from a defensive tackle, for example? How many bench presses do you want to see? So
30?
I don't think anybody. I'm trying to. Jacob Mangum-Farrar, who's a edge rusher, did the most. I don't have his number right in front of me. He was very impressive. I think he maybe got into the 30s, but most of the guys topped out in the 20s. Now, wide receivers and all that were doing like 7 or 8. But you don't. Bench pressing isn't really as important for them. So it's fascinating to watch that. And then they did kind of the one that I wanted to try, even though I'd probably kill myself doing it, vertical jump. I never really had watched that formally before. And they set the bar based on your reach, which makes sense. And then and then it's a straight, vertical leap, and some impressive leaps yesterday. Some of those guys have some hops, but and then once you get into all that stuff was at the stadium, and then at the practice facility, there's the 40-yard dash, there's a cone drill. The surprise yesterday, now Indiana quarterback Curtis Rourke, of course, we found out after the season, played the season with a torn ACL. So he had surgery. He was not able to participate in any drills either at pro day or at the combine last week. Who stepped in to do the passing drills for the wide receivers was the new quarterback, Fernando Mendoza. So that was a nice surprise. I don't know that we knew that was going to happen. So it was a little preview of IU's new quarterback. And I'm here to tell you, he can throw the ball a little bit. It was impressive to watch. He was primarily throwing deep routes to Miles Price and Keyshawn Williams and others who are, aspiring to make it to the NFL. And he threw an accurate deep ball, had a lot of zip on his medium routes, and it was cool to see that. It was a nice, I wrote about it yesterday, but it was a nice little preview of things to come. Because spring ball, believe it or not, starts on Saturday for Indiana. So Saturday is going to be a busy day for those of us who cover the Hoosiers. But so yeah, it was cool. These guys are really, the players that we talked to, we did talk to Curtis Rourke. We talked to CJ West, defensive tackle, who did take part in the combine last week, and several other guys. And most of them are just thankful for the process. CJ West was still beaming about just being in the NFL combine, which for him was kind of a dream come true. So the pro prospects of these guys, we'll see. I mean, that's still, the NFL draft's still a ways off, but it'll be interesting. I think Rourke, if teams aren't worried about his injury issues, should maybe be a lower round draft pick, maybe middle of the draft type of situation. We'll see. But CJ West, I know had he had some good speed time at the combine. So we weren't really in a position to do. We were too far away to hear the times for the 40-yard runs and all that yesterday. But it was good for these guys to kind of revisit what they did at Indiana, but also turn the page and see what's next for them. So good day for them. And then we will turn the page to the 2025 season with spring ball starting on Saturday. I don't know. We'll see what we're able to watch as reporters, but obviously the excitement level for football is way higher than it typically is in the off season because IU should be pretty good again next year. So people are excited, and it's a good thing, to see football kind of get a little bit of March play when basketball is normally the dominant thing. Here. Nothing wrong with that. We can multitask and do a little bit of both. So we'll see what's happening with football later this week too.
There you have it. Indiana football on the map, kicking off spring ball on Saturday. And yeah, you guys don't know what to. Signetti's second year maybe it's different than the first. What did you guys get to see? Or I forget the timeline. Was it not available for spring ball last year? I don't even remember how that you guys. So you don't really know what you're going to get when come Saturday.
I wasn't with us yet, so my role was a little bit different last year. So I don't really recall what access there was in the spring. I think it was normal, but we'll see. There are some new players that are going to be contributing, but also plenty of holdovers too. There's plenty of familiar names coming back on both sides of the ball for Indiana. Guys like D'Angelo Pons, cornerback, Aiden Fisher, linebacker, Mikhail Kamara, defensive end. So on the defensive side of the ball, and then Elijah Surratt coming back at wide receiver, among others. So plenty of familiar names mixed in with some new names to know, like Fernando Mendoza and Roman Hemby, running back from Maryland. So good mix. And, at this point, it's kind of like in Signetti we trust. He's got what we learned last year is that, the table that he sets for his players and his coaches is so rock solid, until we see it falter, which we haven't, you have to trust that he's going to get it right. So we'll see. There's all kinds of factors. There's still another portal to come yet for football after spring ball is over. So it's still a work in progress, but and hopefully they stay healthy through the spring too. But it's exciting. It's spring ball can be a drag when the team is not or even like a 500 level team. We're not in the South, the Midwest, and most people, spring ball isn't as big of a deal in this part of the world. But when you have a good team to focus on, it's makes it interesting. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, lots of stuff to look forward to. So keep it locked over on Indiana Hoosiers on SI. Todd will be covering the women's Big Ten tournament starting tomorrow. Jack is working his way back to Indiana, and he'll be back in the fold as well. And then, spring football right around the corner. So big things happening at IU. So again, Indiana Hoosiers on SI. He is Todd Golden. I am Brandon Brown. Thanks for listening to us yap about a lot of things here for 45 minutes, and we will be back next week to see where some things are with the basketball programs, and I guess we'll have a couple of days of football to talk about as well come next week. So that'll be pretty cool. So thanks a lot for listening, and thanks for the time, Todd.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks everybody for giving us a listen.